Gary, good evening.
Good evening, Ian.
Yeah, it's good to be back. And we've got a guest tonight. So who we got joining us on the show?
So we got Gary from the EV Musings podcast, and he's going to talk all things EV, and he's very knowledgeable.
Excellent. And before we dive into that as well, I just want to mention my album is out now.
Oh,
called Optimistic. So optimistic with a question mark, because I thought that was a bit pretentious, so it sounded good. So we've got so I've got 11 very 80s synthwave type tracks that are on there. We've got a bit of track description there. You can find them on all the usual places. So it's on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, YouTube Music, all the usual places. Yeah, they're all quite upbeat actually, with a 80s feel to them. So a bit of Pet Shop Boys, a bit of Kraftwerk, all that kind of stuff. So, and even a live track from 1989, which is a little bit of a Tangerine Dream tribute, because they had a tendency to do live tracks in the mid 80s that weren't quite as live as you would think when you sit. So we've got a bit of crowd noise and everything else in there. So check those out. So far it's been the biggest release that I've had. So yeah, I've been really enjoying doing that. And I've also got a sound set that I released for the Mod Wave, so that's available on our YouTube channel as well. Do briefly want to mention as well, we did get a dev build. You know, last week I said we hadn't had a dev build for a while, so we got a dev build that is on the 26120 build, which is a 24H2. So they're now in the blog post. It's Microsoft say they're focusing on 24H2. So the dev channel is officially 24H2. Canary is other things that they're testing, obviously for something next year. So if you want to be testing 24H2, then this is on. There wasn't much in the build, but I think they're preparing that ground for later as well. So yeah, that's interesting to see. So I've got a blog post on that. I didn't do a video on that. I've got a couple of the videos, like I mentioned, about and the Akai one. I think I mentioned it the other week, but I've done the Akai, so a bit of an oddball or a forgotten 80s synth. So I've got a new sound set as well coming out this week, which is ambient and Berlin School electronic music. So wow. Look out for that one. Right, so let's go straight to our guest.
As you can see, we've got a special guest tonight, another Gary. Gary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gary Comerford. I run the EV Musings podcast, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, Gary, because you've been involved in the campaign against some of the strange stories which have been told about EVs lately. I saw there was one this week, wasn't there, about a hospital refusing to let EVs in because they might catch fire, which is absolutely crazy.
The ironic thing about that is, if you actually read the article from the BBC, what it said was the other car park at Alderhay Hospital both allows electric vehicles and has chargers there. It was just that one particular car park that needed to have some sort of sprinkler system added into it before health and safety felt comfortable in letting electric vehicles on there. But that's not the message that came across to the general media. It's EVs are dangerous. They won't even allow them in hospitals. It's a bad thing. Rah, 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 rah.
But I guess that's one of those things that gets clicks. A story about a quite sensible car parking arrangement has been found at local hospital is not going to get any clicks.
Well, you're right. I mean, it must be 4 or 5 months ago, I put a post up on LinkedIn, and it started with EVs are crap. Next line, that's what people tell me. And there was, like a mini essay about some of the things that people say and why it's not right. It got 250,000 hits and nearly 500 comments, mostly from people who've come in and they've clicked because they see the headline. They like it when somebody says EVs are crap. Now, what I said at the time, and I should have followed through with it, is I want to put the same post up now, but remove that first thing. So it doesn't say EVs are crap. It says EVs are great. I just see what sort of a different engagement I get on it. You know.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not just EV. I think that's across the board, isn't it? With all internet articles, that clickbait thing, we just can't seem to get away from it. I mean, headlines very rarely match the content anymore, unfortunately.
And that's right. And I was chatting with Quentin Wilson a while back, and he said misinformation will derail the EV adoption if we let it. But as you say, it's not just EV. It's anything on there which has a polarizing point of view. And it doesn't really matter. No, it does matter. But not so long ago, people could have disagreements and they'd say, well, I think this and I think that. And, you know, you'd talk about it and you might change your point of view and go to the other person's point of view. Or you just say, well, I don't agree with you, and that's fine. But now it's very much you're wrong and I'm right. And people just don't seem to want to listen to the other side.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a societal thing, I think, isn't it, at the moment? But we're very much like that. It's in politics, it's in everything, isn't it? I mean, the whole point of science, everything is to have an opinion, isn't it? Or in theory, until something's proven otherwise, then you change it to. But it seems to be people won't want to back down on things. But I guess also with the EV world, there's a lot of vested interests interested in spinning this out as well. It's not just, you know, the general internet. There's also people with organizations with that interest.
There's vested interests on both sides, but I think what you'll find with a lot of the EV vested interests is they tend to base their discussions on factual information, whereas where you get a lot from the other side is blatant lies. I mean, let's talk about the fire at Luton Airport car park. Yeah, started by a diesel, categorically started by a diesel, but in come the other side. Oh, it was an electric car. No, it wasn't. It was a diesel. Oh, it was a diesel hybrid. No, it wasn't. It was a plain diesel. I don't believe you. Yeah, you come up, you tell them the facts, and they'll come back and say, I don't believe you. So how can you fight against that?
Yeah, and that's just a general point on fires. I mean, statistically, a petrol or diesel car will catch fire much more often than an EV will.
Internal combustion engine. The clue's in the name. Combustion.
Yeah, and the other thing is yes, very early battery electric vehicles, and I mean very early battery electric vehicles, probably didn't have the safety features which are built into all battery electric vehicles now, but they are probably the safest cars you can have from catching fire point of view. Yeah, I mean, when they catch fire, they really catch fire, and they are difficult to put out, but there are techniques for putting them out, which all the fire brigades know now, and they can contain pretty quickly, whereas that's not always the case with other. If you get a fuel leak, it's very difficult to contain. Whereas an electric vehicle, it tends to be contained in the electric vehicle.
That's right. One of the problems they had at Luton is because a lot of modern cars now have plastic fuel tanks. Yeah. As soon as the car next to you starts on fire, the heat will burn the fuel tank of your car, and then suddenly you're just adding to it, and it becomes a domino effect.
But I'm not going to deny that battery electric vehicles, if they do catch fire, do really catch fire, and they are difficult to contain. But you have special containment for that, and because it's a very rare occurrence, you've got the containment available for it. You don't need to have lots of those containments.
I saw a video yesterday of a new product that's come out, and it's basically a fire blanket for electric vehicles. And when they're on fire, you drape the blanket over it, and it completely stops the fire. Pretty much instant. Yeah. Now, if you remove the blanket, it will start up on fire again, because that's the nature of lithium-ion batteries when they go on fire. But as long as you keep that on, you can get rid of everything that's around there and get people in who will be able to sort it out without the fire spreading.
Yeah. And it's like any electrical fire. I mean, we know that you don't throw water on electrical fires. It's or whatever. There's always ways to contain them. But and that's just one of the things which comes up. But it's used as you say, there are vested interests, as Ian rightly pointed out, who will amplify anything around this line. So one instance of battery electric car getting on fire will be in all the press, whereas the 400 odd electric battery petrol based fires a week would be not even reported on.
But it's even worse than that, because it doesn't actually have to be an electric vehicle on fire. There is quite a famous video going around from somewhere in Russia about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a van carrying propane canisters that set on fire, and they were exploding every couple of seconds. EV fire. Look at this, it's an EV fire. And people just go, oh yeah, it must be an EV fire because it's a car and it's on fire, so it must be electric. And that's how it propagates. And there's a lack of critical thinking. People don't actually go, well, hang on, why are we having all these constant explosions? Electric vehicle fires, if they're going to explode, they explode. They don't continually keep exploding. And yet this one was doing that. But nobody stops to think, are we being told the truth here? Because it suits their narrative.
And you mentioned Quentin Wilson there, and obviously he's got the campaign at the moment against all this disinformation, which I know you've had a little bit of involvement in. And I know when I was at Everything Electric and we were talking about this, there was this nice little pamphlet that's been put out in conjunction with the AA, wasn't it?
Yes, the AA was the RAC.
RAC, I can't remember. It's one of the two of them.
Yes, yeah, which was a fantastic document that Quentin and the team at Stop Burning Stuff had put together, and basically goes through some of the key ones that consistently come up over and over again. The battery's going to last for 3 years, and then you're going to have to throw it in landfill because it's worthless. And the battery costs £20,000 to replace, and I'm not quite sure how those two fit together. Schrodinger's battery, it's both too expensive to replace but cheap enough to throw into a landfill. You know, how does that work? And if you were at Stop Burning, if you were at Everything Electric in the Excel, you would have got a copy of that. But there are links available to download a PDF from, I think it's the RAC website. I could be wrong about that, but I'm sure you'll put a link in the show notes, won't you?
Yeah.
We will. I'm trying to find it as we speak.
Yeah, I'll drop it in, no problem.
Fantastic.
It's interesting. I mean, whichever it is, ICAA, the fact that one of the big consumer road organisations would put their name to this says something about the detail in it.
It does. It's I mean, it could have been anybody who put the name to this, because there's a lot of people in the EV space who would benefit from having something like this out in the public. I mean, any of the charge point operators, it will be in their best interest to back something like this. You've got, as you say, the AA, you've got the RAC, even Everything Electric themselves, the Fully Charged show, as it is, they've got quite a large, I think they're up at over 1 million subscribers on YouTube at the moment. So putting the link out there on that part of the website is probably going to be useful as well. And, you know, if you look around some of the players that are in the market at the moment, Europcar, for example, they're going quite heavily into electric vehicle rentals. So it would be great to have them handing something out like this to all their non-EV renters. Hi, you're not renting an electric vehicle. That's fine. Is it because you've got a problem with some of the myths that are coming out? Here's a little book that talks about the myths and how they're exactly that. They're myths and they're not true.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I think that's probably it's reaching the people that discard any of the information and just have a fear. I mean, part of it, I guess, is that people don't like change. So, and if you hear some negativity, it means you don't have to think about it, and you can just say, "Oh, well, I don't need to think about that because I've heard this is bad." And so, I suppose reaching those kind of people is what's needed, really. And I guess the good thing is there are like YouTube channels and podcasts like yours and others where that information is available. You've got to seek it, haven't you? As opposed to with a bit of negativity, if it just is in your feed, it kind of drip feeds into you, and you it probably seeps in there.
Yeah, I think
I've just found the link. It's actually
Oh,
it was actually through Faircharge, which is collaboration between Fully Charged, Stop Burning Stuff, Recharge UK, Charge Safe, and the RAC. So Gary was right, and I shouldn't have doubted Gary. He's always right on this stuff.
But no, Ian, coming back to what you were saying there, if you've seen, you're probably all aware of the technology adoption curve, the standard bell curve, and you've got the innovators, the early adopters, the early mass adopters, the late mass adopters, and the laggards. Well, we're with electric vehicles, we're on that sharp upward slope past the early adopters onto the early mass adoption. And I think things like the little book of EV myths, and hopefully some of the stuff that comes out of my podcast, is very much aimed at these people who are on the early mass adoption side. You're always going to get those people who go, no, I'm a diesel guy, I'm going to buy a diesel on the last day before they ban the sale of fossil fuel cars, and I'm going to run it into the ground. And that's fine. They're the laggards. They're the guys right at the tail end of that curve. They're not the people I'm interested in, because frankly, they're going to be pulled kicking and screaming into the electric vehicle world. They're not going to like it, but as you say, people don't like change. Me, I'm very much interested in the early mass adopters. I mean, I was in a car, a queue today of vehicles, and within the 10 or 15 vehicles that were around me, there would have been about a third of them were electric. And I go back 6 years with electric vehicles. That was almost unheard of 6 years ago. It was almost unheard of 3 years ago to have that many vehicles, that many electric vehicles so close together in traffic. Now you go into the central London. That's obviously a big factor in that. But they're cheaper to run for most people. If you can charge at home, a lot of the taxis use them. They're everywhere. So we are getting very much into that early mass adoption. And pretty soon we'll peak. We'll get into the late mass adoption. That's going to be a great place to be in. And then, as I say, a couple of years down the line, when diesel and petrol become a lot more expensive because nobody wants it anymore, those laggards are going to have to move across and finally sort of grasp the nettle and go, oh, I don't want to do this, but I've got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just about it's having the options available and the information available. And I suppose the infrastructure improvements that are coming around all the time as well helps.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing about infrastructure, we are not. If everybody went electric today, the infrastructure isn't there. But we're not all going electric today. We, as I say, because of the curve, it could be 10 years, it could be 15 years, it could be 20 years. And last year alone, we had a 43% increase in the number of public chargers that are available. I was chatting with Chris Pateman-Jones, who's the chair of Charge UK, the industry body from the charge point operators. He says this year it's probably going to be similar, maybe a little bit higher. So 40-50% improvement again on last year's figures. You're never going to be able to maintain that 50% improvement every year. So it is going to tail off. But by the time we get to that stage where most of the people are driving electric, the infrastructure is going to be a lot better than it is at the moment. There are, I mean, if you look at a map of the UK and try and look at the areas, I call them the charging wastelands, the middle of Wales, parts of Lincolnshire, the Lake District, the bit between sort of Preston and the Scottish borders. There's a few little areas there where you've got chargers, but a lot of them are, charging wastelands. There is not enough infrastructure there. And there are many reasons why that is the case. And if you live in that area and you're thinking about getting an electric car, you might have to sit and think about it and become one of the late mass adopters. But you look at most of the other places around the country, even as far down as Devon and Cornwall, which also used to be charging wastelands. The improvement over the last couple of years has been fantastic. I was down at Exeter Services recently, 32 Tesla superchargers, 24 grid serve high power chargers, all in one location. Reading near me, 12 grid serve, 12 new Tesla V4s, 4 BP Pulse, all on one site. So 3 different charge point operators in one location. There was a point not so long ago when that was almost unbelievable. What was the other one? Solstice Park on the way down to Stonehenge. 2 separate Instavolt charger units. No, 4 units and 2 separate installs. GridServe, Tesla, and BP Pulse, all in one, off like a motorway service area off that's not on a motorway. It's off the A303. So it's getting a lot better, and it's happening a lot quicker than people believe it is.
Yeah. And it's certainly noticeable. I mean, even year on year, the difference in charging. I mean, there's still spaces where it's challenging. I mean, there's certain areas where unless you go a little bit off the beaten track, you're still going to struggle to find the capacity. I mean, around mine and Peterborough, really brilliant for chargers. We were early people to get them. We've got lots of chargers all around the city. The problem is people going to the services on their A1 don't know to get off the Government Road, so they're all trying to queue up for a few Ionicys, and that desperately needs some expansion.
My bugbear personally, I'm down in Hampshire. I have parents who live up in Yorkshire, so I got the M1 quite frequently. And I checked the figures about 6 or 8 months ago. Of the 10 motorway service areas on the M1, there's only 3 of them have more than 2 chargers on there, not counting Teslas. Yeah. Now that's changed since then because they've opened up is it Woolly Edge and Watford Gap, so there are quite a few there. But if you then go up a junction, go off a mile, half a mile, 5 minutes drive, there's a lot more there. But people don't, as you say, Gary, people don't think to do that. They go into the motorway service areas, they look around, they go, well, there's only 2 chargers here. They're already being used. There's a queue to use them. The infrastructure's crap. Whereas, 5-minute drive.
And as we know, one of the big challenges with motorway services is they're actually not built in the best places to get electricity to them. Most of them are sort of halfway between two major cities or conurbations and out in the sticks, and unless you've happen to have a solar farm nearby or something else, getting large amounts of electricity is a challenge. But it's even a challenge sometimes when they're near cities, like the Leicestershire services. We had to turn its chargers off because it was making the service station black out. But that's not an EV issue. That's an electricity supply issue, which is something that we should have been as a country working on many years ago.
Well, absolutely. And of course, the government has put forward the rapid charging fund of however many millions that is, to specifically address that issue and to get more power out to the motorway service areas, so that people like GridServe, like Tesla, like Apple Green, like Instavolt can go in and either expand what's already there or put new stuff in, as is the case at Leicester Forest East, which, as you say, has no chargers at all.
Yeah, it's 950 million, wasn't it, for Rapid Charging Fund, I think.
Something like that.
It was
not an insignificant amount.
So amount of money, yeah, we should help, and I know it's being used, but the challenge still is, even with that, is actually the amount of resource available from the National Grid and also the local suppliers to actually install electricity infrastructure. I mean, I talked to someone a few years back, and they were saying that you have to remember a megawatt feed into anywhere was a very rare occurrence a few years ago, and they may have done one every 2 or 3 years, and now they're expected to do one every couple of weeks. It's just they need time to ramp up their resources. And it's interesting, that's a bit of a bell curve as well, isn't it? I mean, you're going to have a rapid adoption of trying to get all this installation, and then it's going to go away again. So you're ramping up resources which you're going to lose halfway down the line.
The whole grid issue is, is it opening up Pandora's box? Yeah. Because I was at a conference last year, and they had somebody from National Grid there, and she said, we basically have, I forget what the exact figures were, but it was something like we have the ability to put in 20 gigawatts of new installs. We've got requests for 150 gigawatts of new installs. what she said is what we've got in there are a lot of phantom or zombie projects. And I was chatting with somebody from a charge point operator the other day, and he said it's actually weird because when somebody puts in a request to a tender from a council point of view to put a charger in, if 5 companies apply for that tender, the first thing they'll do, all 5 of them, is they'll put in requests to the National Grid to get that the grid upgraded at that point. Now, only one of those 5 is actually going to end up getting the tender, but the other 4 are still in the queue because they never get cancelled, and these then become zombie projects. So one of the things that's happened last year is the government put in place a rule that allowed the National Grid to go and say, right, we're now going to go through and delete all the zombie projects. So that 150 gigawatts of new connections will now drop down to something that is a little bit more manageable. There's obviously still going to be challenges, but it's going to be a lot better than it was.
It's great. It's really good to see. I think the other thing which has improved an awful lot lately is the state of the chargers and how easy they are to use and the convenience of it. And I know you've been involved in that as well to some extent with the Charge Safe initiative.
Yeah, I did a little bit of work with Charge Safe last year. Well, I say it was last year or the year before. They did a pilot in Oxford, and I went round and evaluated a lot of the chargers that they've got there. So yeah, they're looking at this from 2 different aspects. There's the accessibility point of view, so how these chargers adhere to the PAS 1899 standard for disabled access, for example. Are there curbs to get up there? Are the screens low enough so that people can actually use these if they're in a wheelchair, etc.? And then there's the actual safety aspect of this. Is the place covered in CCTV? Does it have lighting at the appropriate point? Is it somewhere that's round the back of a hotel at the depths of a car park where you can be very, very vulnerable at night? So a lot of that sort of stuff is now feeding through to some of the newer charge point installations that are happening at the moment. I spent a day recently with BP Pulse in the Midlands at 3 of their large hubs. There's the huge one they've got at the NEC, one in Tamworth, and another one at Berkshire Island. And the one at the NEC, fantastic. It's got canopies. It's close to facilities. It's lit. It's CCTV. Very, very accessible. Unfortunately, the other 2 curbs were there. The area was, not exactly the nicest. The lighting wasn't there. It wasn't particularly accessible. And when I questioned BP about it, they said, well, one of the problems that we've got in places like that is we're limited by what the landlord can provide for us. Now, they own the site. As far as I understand, they own the site at the NEC, so they could do what they wanted with it. Mm-hmm. But the other 2 hubs that they put in there were in car parks that were owned by a third-party landlord. So they couldn't remove they only had a certain number of parking spaces that were available. And if they made them all wheelchair accessible, it meant that they wouldn't be able to put as many chargers in. Or if they wanted to put that many chargers in, they'd have to get more spaces. And of course, every space that you take from a retail park costs the landlord money. Plus, something that I didn't realise until quite recently, when the retail park is first created, the plan says you will have a number of parking spaces. And as soon as you cut that down, that's a planning permission violation.
That was one we got me. I mean, I remember talking to Ian from Osprey about that and how challenging that is with the plan, and also the fact the planning regulations are dated from the 50s in terms of car parking spaces, and we've talked about the size of cars get wider and wider, and that's even more so. But especially if you're going to allow proper access for disabled or even parent and child, which is one of my big bugbears, and getting children out of a car is really challenging. Then you have issues. But equally, there are all sorts of other regulations they can start quoting on Disability Act and not allowing proper access, which can counter that to some extent with the planners. So, but you have to then reapply for your planning permission, which is an archaic process. And right.
And don't get me started on putting canopies in. As soon as you want a canopy on somewhere, that immediately extends the planning by.
Because you actually have to request specific planning permission then, whereas previously you could actually work on the fact you're just putting something on a parking space, which is actually allowed. It's a very challenging environment, and something the government could do something about fairly easily. That's one thing which is definitely in their remit to sort.
Well, one of the issues I think that charging stations have that petrol stations don't have is petrol stations defined as critical infrastructure. Therefore, they have I'm not saying the rules and regulations don't apply, but it's a lot easier to put something in and get around them. Whereas charging stations at the moment are not classed as critical infrastructure. I understand there is a move in place to try and get them classed as critical infrastructure, and that then means the planning becomes a lot easier. But here's another thing that happens when you make a charging station part of critical infrastructure. You can then deal with credit card pre-authorizations in the same way as petrol stations. So you tap the card, it pre-authorizes, you take the money, you take the whatever it is, the fuel or the charge, and it immediately refunds the pre-authorization, and it's completely seamless. Whereas at the moment, because of the way it's designed and the fact that it's not critical infrastructure, and you do that on a charging station, it can be hours, days, even a month before that pre-authorization back onto your credit. And in some cases, I know of one individual who physically had to chase the charge point operator up after a month to get them to refund the pre-authorization. It's just, again, big can of worms. Make everything critical infrastructure, and that minimizes, goes away. It's got to be done.
Sorry,
I was going to say, what about the other side of it, the home charging? Has the situation with that improved over the last few years? Is, getting chargers in, and the market's a big market. Do you just Google providers, or what's the kind of route that people go through for that?
That's ironically the episode of my podcast, which is coming out next week, which will be the 13th as we record this, is all about getting a home charger, because obviously the EV world is split at the moment into those who can charge at home or can't charge at home. And within the can charge at home, you've got those who can charge at home and charge off street. So like myself, I'm lucky I've got a drive, I can put a charger in there. But there are also a number of people, a lot of whom live, for example, in Oxford, where they can charge at home, they've got a charger, but they don't have off-street parking. So they've got to park in front of their house on the side of the street there. And there are a number of different options for getting the power from their house out to their car. And it doesn't involve sort of stringing a cable out at neck height, which I have actually seen. And it's just frightening, the health and safety aspects of that. But yeah, you're right. I was at a trade show last year, and fully 50% of the floor space of the trade show was home charge providers. A lot of them were brand new. There were quite a few who come in from the Far East. My guess conservatively is 50% of those will not be with us in 5 years' time. So if you look at it logically, there's a small handful of operators who or manufacturers who create good, reliable home charging things. So you've got Zaptec, Omi, iEnergy, Anderson, Hypervolt, people like that. Those are not endorsements, but those are ones that I'm aware of. So, you've got to go out and find an electrician. The electrician will come in. There's an amount of work that they're going to have to do to see what it's going to take to put that and link it into your current electrical system. So again, I'm quite lucky. The distance between my fuse box and the charger is about 6 feet. So it's a really, really easy fit. But I know people who've got separate garages, so you've got to do cable runs under the ground, and that becomes a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, and I know all about that.
And depending on which model you choose, you can get dumb chargers, so you plug in, it charges. When it's full, it stops. You can get smart chargers, which allow you to take advantage of time of use tariffs. So you only charge when the electricity is cheap. You can get ones that link in with solar panels. So today it's been very nice where I am. So I've had the car plugged in, the solar's been coming straight down through my charger and straight into the car. Not all chargers can handle the solar power. So the ones that do, a little bit more expensive than the ones that don't. The smart chargers, a little bit more expensive than the dumb chargers. So, you know, it's as they say in the old, you know, when Gary and I were young on the pools, per many 8 from 10, you know, depends which combination you want to actually work. You can then make your choice, get your electrician in. And the fitting, generally, it's, you know, a couple of hours to get the charger actually fitted and installed. Maybe a little bit more complex if you've got to link it into the solar.
Yeah. So there are. It is easy to get hold of it and get started on that. It's just, I suppose, it's just trying to find the right one and just, you know, one that works for you.
Yes, absolutely. It's you're never going to hit the case where you can't find a charger. There's always going to be a company that will provide you with a charger. There's always going to be an electrician who'll come and put it in. The fact of the matter is, at the moment, we've probably got a little bit too much choice, and a lot of people are sort of stuck with choice paralysis. Which one do I want to go for? Do I want to go for the shiny one here or the shiny one there? So, you know, I can't make a decision for anybody because everybody's circumstances are a little bit different.
Yeah.
I guess there is one challenge on smart chargers, which is coming the last few months or so. A lot of them rely on linking to the car's information systems and via an API. It's obviously my end of the wood with the development side of things. And a lot of car companies, and this is partly driven, I think, by the new regulations around security, which they all have to adhere to, are now starting to lock down their APIs so that third parties can't actually get access to them, which then means some of these smart chargers can't automatically control the charge. No, at least not as intelligently as they would before, where they could look at the charge in the car and work it out from there. I mean, it's interesting because I think it probably has even implications with things like bidirectional charging and vehicle to grid, and although you'd hope that would follow some sort of standard where the interface would be with the car rather than through an API. But it does show you how vulnerable we are to people switching things off. I mean, no iPace owners, for example, no longer able to use Octopus's nice EV tariff, which you get if you've got a smart charger, which will talk to Octopus because they can no longer do that. And that's because I think that's an interesting challenge, but not an EV really specific challenge, although it does have more impact because of the controlling the charges. Because you want to be able to charge up on cheap rate. That's the main reason for having a smart charger, is so you can control it and get your cheap overnight rates or whenever your cheap rate is.
Absolutely, and I think sort of looping back to the question of the APIs. When you want to use the cheap overnight rate, there's two ways of actually linking in your charger. You can link it in, there's two ways of linking in the tariff that you've got. You can link it in through the charger, or you can link it in through the vehicle. And for example, Octopus Energy, mine runs, when I first did mine, because I'm on the Intelligent Octopus Go, it linked into the vehicle. Since then, they've updated the Zappy that I've got, so it can now link in through the charger itself. But I had Alex Thwaites, who's the head of OVO Charge Anywhere, their EV offering. And he said that they've got a very similar system to Octopus. They've got almost like an AI thing behind the scenes called Kaluza Flex. And basically, they're creating an API which will link into any charger. So they've got half a dozen at the moment that are actually sort of native to the offering that they've got, but they're opening it up so that if you have a smart charger that's not on their list, you can speak to the people who sort of supply that charger, the company that manufactures them, and they can make the API link into Kaluza Flex so that you can then use the OVO Energy 7 pence a kilowatt hour 24/7 on whichever charger you've got, and therefore into whichever car you've got.
Which is, I think, the right approach. I think relying on car APIs it's always a little bit tricky anyway, because they're not necessarily that reliable anyway, because the infrastructure is only as good as the car manufacturer wants to maintain it, and often they're not as interesting once they've sold you the car which is 3 years old or 4 years old.
I'm an ID3 driver. I know exactly what the software on a vehicle is like, and it's not good in many cases.
I suppose that's that's the thing with all products, though, isn't it? Once they've sold you, it could, whether it's operating systems or synthesizers or whatever. Once they've sold it, they're not as keen as doing the upgrade of the firmware.
Yeah, which is interesting for the second-hand market, and something which I don't think we've really had in vehicles over the years. I mean, a second-hand car has always been as good as a new car when it was new. So I mean, that's the thing. Whereas now a second-hand car may not be as good as a car was when it was new, because you can't get access to some of the remote features and the APIs and things like that.
And when it comes to things like that, I always go to the gold standard, which is Tesla, because it doesn't matter how old the car is, with very few exceptions, it will still get the over-the-air updates. And that technology has been around since at least, I think, 2016, and yet how many other EV manufacturers regularly do over-the-air updates? There are a couple, but not as many as there should be. And it's like plug and charge. Tesla have been doing that for years and years and years. And the technology is there, the standard is there, the hardware is there, the people that know how to do this are there. And yet, how many non-Tesla chargers do plug and charge on all vehicles? The answer is none. How many non-Tesla vehicle chargers do plug and charge on some vehicles? Ionity, Porsche.
Yeah.
Fastned have a thing that they call auto charge.
Which is not the standard, but it works.
Yeah, in some cars, not in mine.
Yeah. So because your car has a rotating security thing, so it doesn't give the ID, which is again another, and that's something again with the security infrastructure thing that all the manufacturers are going to get fined for if they don't obey. Will probably be standard across the board. So
absolutely.
It'll have to be the plug and charge standard. I mean, it's interesting. I think that it's interesting with the developments in vehicles now. Anyway, I mean, we're going to see a lot of security stuff coming in and things like that. But how far behind we still are with that from those early tester days with the things which are just convenient for use. And it's because I think the manufacturers who are making these cars come from a background which is not EV specific. They don't understand necessarily how EVs are used. Getting better, but I think that's actually where the Chinese market comes in, because all these Chinese manufacturers tend to be EV first, and they actually have an understanding of the EV market more so. So they've got probably an edge there in that respect.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that the Chinese manufacturers have going for them, and this is in no way meant as a derogatory comment, they tend to build on what's already there in the West.
Yeah.
So they've looked at the way Tesla do things, and they've started to put a lot of that sort of functionality into their vehicles. I drove a BYD, I think it was the Seal, everything electric, which is pitched as the BYD equivalent of the Model 3, and absolutely fantastic car, really, really nice inside. It's got all the great software in there. So, it gives me a level of confidence that, as you say, they're looking at this from a driver's point of view. They're emulating the best in the market, Tesla, and it gives me a good feeling going forward. And then you compare that with, the vehicle I've got, the ID3. Now, bear in mind, the ID3 was delayed on its release because the software wasn't ready. The software came out, version 1. The software then updated, version 2. I'm now on version 3, and it has only just on version 3 got the ability to tell you how fast your car is charging. On a car that is built from the ground up to be electric and is on version 3 of the operating system. That's just ridiculous. That shows that the people who are creating the software are not looking at this from a driver's point of view, and they're not looking at this from an EV point of view.
And VW's ID software is probably one of the worst on the market for that. And the newer version, the version 4 stuff does seem to crack a lot of those issues. But yeah, you have to have new hardware, and it's not like to come to this.
And at version 1, not at version 4, shouldn't it? If they were designing this from the ground up, as my very first electric vehicle was a Kia Soul. It was a compliance car. It was a petrol car that they'd taken the engine out and put an electric drive in, and it still used the existing software with a few modifications. It was far better than the software I've got in the ID3 at the moment. You know, and this is a car that's been, I got one of the last versions of that in 2018. So it's been out probably 10 years with that level of software on it. And yet a brand new car that's not a compliance car, that's not an old car that's been updated. It's a brand new car. And they're now getting onto, as you say, version 4. Only now have they started to solve some of the software problems.
Yeah. No. And I don't think software is an EV, generally an EV issue in vehicles. Software for cars generally has been poor over the years. Some manufacturers do it better than others.
Well, it's interesting because the other thing I said, I've got adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assist on my car, and I love it. I love it. But as the old saying goes, 80% of the time, it works all the time. But every now and again, it will completely forget that there's a car in front of you and it will accelerate towards it. And that's a software issue. You know, occasionally it will, here's a good one. Coming down the A3 the other day, the A3 is 60 miles an hour straight down. But of course, there are exits off the A3 with roundabouts that go above. But the software on the adaptive cruise control, when you get underneath the roundabouts, it thinks you're on the roundabout and it brakes to 30 miles an hour, even though you're still on the A3, which is a 60 mile an hour zone. It should be a simple solution for that, especially as it's got cameras on board that can read the speed limit signs. And yet it's still, every time you go under a roundabout, it puts the brakes on. You've got to override it until it comes out the other side. It's just teeny-weeny little things like that. Like I say, 80% of the time, it works all the time.
Yeah, it's all good stuff though. I mean, things are moving on, and we hopefully the software will start getting better from these manufacturers, because they know it's an issue, and it's not, as I say, it's not just on the EVs, it's on across the board, because people are expecting better software now. Certainly younger drivers really expect better software in their cars, and really get upset when it's not there. So I don't think that's definitely going to improve. The other area which definitely is improving, and we're seeing it this year, is the battery technology. I mean, it's just chalk and cheese to what it was a few years ago. I mean, you take a first generation Leaf against what we're getting now, even your Soul against what we're getting now, it's just incredible. And to the point where people are talking about, I saw Renault talking about buying cheaper batteries with less capacity, but they're still bigger capacity than the Zoe was when they first brought it out, and the like. To the point now where a 400 mile range car is definitely achievable within reasonable cost. How do you see the impact on the charge point operations from that though? Because if we can start doing 400 mile range journeys in cars, do you actually need to charge at all these services and things?
Well, the whole area of battery technology is fascinating, because it's charging ahead at 1,000 miles an hour, or 400 miles of charge, whichever one. But I think a lot of it is not necessarily focused in the right way. Like, for example, there's only two ways really of getting a really long range vehicle. You either put a huge battery in there. So you look at the Mercedes EQS that will do 400 odd miles, and that's got a 110 kilowatt hour in it. Or you go the way of the original Hyundai Ioniq, which is you put a fairly small battery in there, but you make it nice and streamlined so that it's very, very efficient going through the air. The tendency at the moment for the vast majority of the electric vehicle manufacturers is to say, right, we want the big range, we're going to get a nice big chunky SUV, we're going to stick a 80, 90, 100, 120 kilowatt hour battery in there. People are going to be able to do 400 miles. And yeah, fine. But of course, you put 110 or 100 kilowatt hour battery in there, you've immediately bumped the price of the vehicle up. Whereas if you could say, right, well, we'll knock that back down to 50 kilowatt hours, but we'll make the vehicle smaller, more efficient, easier to run through the air. We'll get low profile tires on, more fuel efficient tires. We'll get air ducting, all that sort of stuff that makes it go through the air a lot quicker or a lot smoother. And suddenly you're still getting the ranges that other cars are getting with a bigger battery, and you've got a smaller battery. I have a friend of mine who's got 38 kilowatt hour Ionic, one of the original wind knives, with 38 kilowatt hour battery on that. He can get 180, 190 miles on that, on 38 kilowatts. I've got 20 kilowatt hours more, and I can basically get about 25 miles more out of that, because his is more aerodynamic, might be a little bit chunkier with the ID3. So I think, if we were to look a little bit more and focus on the kind of cars that we're putting these batteries in, maybe make the batteries a little bit smaller. And then when they do increase the density, which is what they did on the Nissan Leaf, you had the 24 kilowatt hour, then the 30 kilowatt hour, then the 40 kilowatt hour, which were the same size batteries. You just increase the density in there, therefore the range extends. And the same thing will happen as we go forward with the current batteries that we've got. So you will end up getting a longer range vehicle overall without having an absolutely massive, heavy battery in there.
And of course, the other advantage of a smaller battery pack is it charges quicker. Which is so even if you've got a 200 mile range car, I've often argued that 200 miles is actually kind of the sweet spot, 200 to 30. But with a battery which can be charged very quickly, like 15-20 minutes, then that's a really good compromise, especially for the UK, because 200 miles is a long way to go in the UK.
Well, it is. I mean, I drove into the central London today, and my average speed across a 2-hour journey was 34 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So, I'm not getting a huge amount of distance.
Yeah.
I'm not using a huge amount of the battery, but 2 hours is a long time to travel. If you're on the motorway, even on a 70 mile an hour motorway, you're only going to average 55 or 60 because of the way traffic, road work, that sort of thing. And you do 2 hours on that, 2.5 hours maybe, and you're going to get to the stage where, I'm not as young as I used to be. I need to stop, grab a coffee or something like that. Whether it's at a motorway service area, whether it's at a stop that might be 5 minutes off the motorways, whether you're on a main trunk route, a 60 mile an hour zone, and you can sort of stop at one of the charges that they've got there. The pursuit of ultimate range, I think, is not necessarily the best way of going when it comes to electric cars. Everybody says to me, oh yeah, well, I had a diesel, I could do 1,000 miles in a tank and then fill up in 10 minutes. And it's kind of, yeah, but how many times did you drive 1,000 miles? You didn't. You drove 160, 170, 180 miles. You stopped, you had a pee, you had a coffee, you had something to eat, and you did another chunk. Why? That's not much different to what we're advocating with electric vehicles. So, it's a mindset change. And again, coming back to Ian's point earlier, people don't like change. It's a mindset change.
Yeah, it definitely is. I was into actually that always reminds me. My first petrol car I had a range of 140 miles because it had a small petrol tank, and I never found that a problem. I never even thought of that being a problem. I wouldn't even have asked how much range my car got when I bought it.
I mean, I tell this story. When I was young, my father had a Jaguar XJ6, and it was one of those that had the twin fuel tanks on the back. So he had 10 gallons in each fuel tank, and it got 12 miles to the gallon. So he had a 240 mile range, which I can just about do in my ID3 at the moment. But you try and sell a 240 mile range to somebody who's got a Jaguar at the moment, and they'll go, oh, no, I can't do that. But, back in the 80s, when my dad was driving an XJ6, 240 miles was absolutely fine. Nobody thought twice about it. So, why the change?
And I think as battery technology improves and we get faster charging, smaller battery packs actually makes a lot of sense, because we can do 200 miles. I mean, the one thing where I do think a 400-mile range car makes some sense is when you're going into one of those charging black spots. You're going into the centre of Wales and going up to the Lake District for a holiday. I mean, you can just charge all the way, but then you can get all the way there, get all the way back without charging. You can charge at home on a cheap rate, because obviously we do know charging on the road is a little bit more expensive than charging at home.
Yeah, the cost aspect always comes into it. But one of the things I push back on when people say, well, I need a car that does 300-mile range, I need a car that does 400-mile range, and I go, why? So, well, because I don't want to run out of charge. And that's a perfectly valid comment. But if I give you a car that will do 400-mile range, you're going to at some point want to do 407 miles. So you're going to have to charge. If I give you a car that does 500 miles range, at some point you're going to want to do 505 miles. So you're going to have to charge. So the actual range itself, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because like when people had petrol cars, it didn't matter how much petrol you had, you still ran out of fuel at a certain point, because you're still trying to push it further than you could actually do with what was left in the tank. So it's more a case of managing the charge that you've got, managing the amount of fuel that's in the petrol tank, rather than going, oh, I can do 1,000 miles. Yeah, until you need to do 1,005 miles, in which case you're still stuck on the side of the road.
Yeah.
So I think we're just about time. I've learned quite a lot there, I think, tonight, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers have it as well. So, Gary, where can we listen to your podcasts, and where else can we find you on socials and that kind of thing?
Right, my podcast, if you go to evmusings.com/listen, that will take you to the page that has the links out to everything. I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Podcasts, I'm on Stitcher, I'm on all the big platforms. If you want to contact me, I'm at info@evmusings.com. If you want to follow me on the socials, I'm at Twitter at MusingsEV. Don't ask why it's MusingsEV rather than EV Musings. It's just our good friend Elon decided that's how it's going to. Actually, no, I started that before Elon took over, so it was
not his fault this time.
Yeah, it's not his fault in this case. And if you look for me, Gary Comerford on LinkedIn, I will be there. I'll send all those through. You might want to put those in.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, it's been really good catching up. It was really good. Really enjoyed that. So, yeah, we'll get you back on in the future. We'll talk more EVs again. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys. I had a really good time. Appreciate it.
Interesting. Really enjoyed that. Lots to talk about there. A lot of interesting stuff.
Gary's always a great person to talk to. Really nice stuff.
Yeah. Excellent. We'll be at same time, same place next week. You can email me at digitallifestyle.com. We'll see you next week.
Take care and listen to Ian's album. It's brilliant.
Oh yes, have a listen.